Heather Miller was a young, pretty mother of four.
She was always pleasant and outgoing.
Her husband, Kevin, was a former Marine.
As long as we were together, we could do anything, it seemed like.
And together, they appeared to fit perfectly into their quaint rural community.
It's an old conservative area.
A Norman Rockwell type of town.
But hear firsthand how a surprising confession
I was second-guessing myself on believing what I heard.
led to a bitter betrayal.
I was her best friend, and I was turning her in.
And left this tiny conservative town reeling from revelations of black magic.
You know, double, toil and trouble.
Taboo affairs.
I had had female relationships before.
It was pretty scandalous.
And most of all, murder.
They're going to do an autopsy on Lady Luck.
Richland Town, Pennsylvania, April 5th, 2000. Nestled in picturesque Bucks County, this quaint community of 1,300 is about an hour outside of Philadelphia.
It's an old conservative area, and they think highly of family values.
I personally equate it to like a Norman Rockwell type of town. Kind of like everybody knows everybody.
And naturally, almost everyone knew 26-year-old mother of four, Heather Miller.
I would have described Heather as friendly and outgoing. You know, she was always pleasant.
Heather and her husband, a Marine reservist named Kevin Miller, lived in a modest townhouse community a few blocks off of Main Street.
They seemed like just your average, normal kind of couple that you would see on the street.
But as all of Richland Town and the rest of the world was about to find out, there was nothing normal about this pretty young mother. Heather was in the car alone and almost home after running some errands that Wednesday afternoon when the first of several police cars pulled in behind her.
Marked patrol vehicles along with unmarked patrol vehicles. We pulled her over right outside the housing development.
And when troopers from the Pennsylvania State Police approached the car and asked her to please step out of the vehicle, her initial reaction was that the police suddenly surrounding her car had to be some sort of mistake.
She's asking the uniformed troopers what she's being stopped for.
But it was no mistake.
At that time, I asked her to turn around, advised her she was under arrest.
Within moments, Heather was in handcuffs and in the back of a police car. But her very public arrest soon had the tiny town buzzing.
Everyone was talking about this. It was pretty scandalous.
And that was before anyone in town knew all the bizarre details. Secrets that would have never come out if not for a best friend's betrayal.
They're going to do an autopsy on Lady Luck.
Born in 1974, Heather Marie Schumacher spent most of her childhood in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Living the life on the beach was the best thing in the world at the time.
And by the time she was a teenager, Heather had learned to make the most of it.
I did my homework on the beach, hung out with the guys.
However, she barely had a taste of teenage life on the beach before her mother moved Heather and her newborn baby sister to remote Quakertown, Pennsylvania.
It's one of the most rural parts of Bucks County. Very pretty, very picturesque, but there's not a lot to do there.
My mom is originally from here, and when she had my sister, she thought it was time to come home.
The homecoming couldn't have come at a worse time for the teenager.
When I was 14, she moved us up here. I had no friends, didn't know anybody in the area, new school, the whole 9 yards, so it was tough.
So tough that Heather didn't even make it 1 year in her new school.
By the time I was through the sophomore year, I had quit.
A high school dropout, Heather supported herself with a series of minimum wage jobs.
Waitressing, bussing tables.
And it was while waiting tables that the 17-year-old started dating her first serious boyfriend.
Somebody who I thought cared about me.
And his commitment would soon be put to the test.
I was pregnant.
After she gave birth to her daughter, Heather and the little girl's father tried to make a go of it.
We had lived with his parents for a while, and then we lived with my mom.
But according to Heather, the relationship wasn't everything it could be.
Her father was not the best father, and he had other issues that he wanted to use his money on.
So despite having a new baby at home, Heather was forced to find work.
I found 2 part-time jobs at a diner and the seafood restaurant up here in Quakertown.
And it was while working at the seafood restaurant that 18-year-old Heather first met Kevin Miller. 6 years older than Heather, Philadelphia native Kevin Miller had gone to college and spent a year in the military before transferring to the reserves and moving to Bucks County in 1993.
He was a former U.S. Marine.
Once settled in, the 25-year-old worked 9 to 5 at a local bank and got a second job waiting tables on the weekends for a little extra cash.
He was a hard worker.
Kevin's second job just happened to be the seafood place where Heather had also just started working.
It was probably my second week on the job, and he came in.
When he did, the former Marine made quite an impression.
Kevin holds himself high and stands tall and doesn't take crap from anybody.
Kevin quickly noticed Heather, too.
She was an attractive woman.
Soon, the pair started talking on breaks, and Heather opened up about the problems she was having with her boyfriend.
I was able to talk to him and tell him how unhappy I was and how bad things had gotten at home for me. And he helped me become strong enough to turn around and tell my boyfriend at the time that I just couldn't do it anymore and that he needed to leave.
With Heather's old boyfriend out of the picture, Kevin stepped in to fill the void.
It kind of just happened.
Heather and her daughter moved in with Kevin, and thanks to his support, she was able to quit her part-time jobs and focus on raising her little girl.
As long as we were together, we could do anything, it seemed like.
And in April of '95, after 2 years of dating, Heather and Kevin were married.
She finally found the man of her dreams.
One who treated her 4-year-old daughter as his own.
Kevin actually adopted my daughter. She was his through and through, and that's the way we wanted it.
In 1996, Heather gave birth to the couple's first child, leading Kevin to buy the growing family a townhouse on the outskirts of tiny Richland Town.
It's a real tight community. Everybody knows who everybody is. Everybody can see everybody's front door from their house.
Needless to say, it didn't take long for Heather and Kevin to meet their new neighbors, starting with 29-year-old Mindy Robbins.
We basically just kind of were walking in the neighborhood with our children and we met.
Another stay-at-home mom, Mindy and Heather quickly became friends.
We just started having coffee every morning after our older children got on the school bus.
And before long, Heather and Mindy invited other moms in the neighborhood to join them. Women like Diane Zielinski, who lived across the street.
I knew Mindy pretty well. Her children were the same ages as my boys, so they would play together and Mindy would babysit for me sometimes.
Mindy would occasionally babysit for Heather, too. Over the next 4 years, she and Kevin had 2 more children together.
She was at home all the time with the children.
And as a result, Heather became even closer to Mindy and the other stay-at-home moms in the development.
They just had each other to keep each other company.
It was our little coffee clutch.
And in the evenings,
They basically hung out, at each other's houses, maybe over shared bottles of wine.
or maybe a little gossip.
For the most part, it's harmless.
But in April of 2000, what started out as a little harmless gossip over coffee would take a sudden and deadly turn.
It was really an unbelievable shock.
Coming up, Heather lets Mindy in on a secret.
She wanted him dead.
But how far would she go to make it happen?
The spell was considered a banishment.
On April 5th, 2000, police pulled Heather Miller over outside her Richland Town, Pennsylvania home and placed the 26-year-old mother of 4 under arrest.
They arrested her as she was turning into the development. She never got as far as her own home.
We did not want to do it at the house because at the time they had young children at the house. So we were trying to do something a little bit outside the residence.
When first pulled over, Heather appeared shocked, asking what it was all about. But then, as state police investigators clacked on the handcuffs.
And at that point, you could tell in looking at her, she knew she was caught.
While the big shock for Richland Town would be what led to Heather's arrest.
She wanted him dead.
It was how she'd been caught that would be the real surprise for Heather. When Heather and her husband Kevin first moved to Richland Town, it appeared that times were good.
As a young couple at that point, it was great. We were living life. We had our family. We had the house.
But they'd barely moved in before things took a sudden turn for the worse.
He lost his job.
And soon after, Heather had given birth to her third child.
Money got tight.
Kevin did eventually manage to find work.
He had taken 2 jobs, was working basically a double shift 5 days a week.
But it was barely enough to pay the bills, despite the long hours Kevin put in working 2 jobs.
He was basically away from home from 8 in the morning till midnight every day. That would be a strain on anyone's relationship.
According to Heather, the birth of her 4th child only added to the strain.
I was home to raise the 4 kids and take care of the house. It was stressful for me.
And having 4 kids to provide for was stressful for Kevin, too.
That resulted in a lot of pressure being put on Kevin, and he was taking that pressure out on his wife.
It was pretty much fighting all the time.
Naturally, Heather shared her predicament with her closest neighbor, Mindy.
We were close to a lot of other people in the development, but we became closer than everybody else.
They were best friends and spent so much time together, talked on the phone all the time, they shared all these secrets.
Everything from her troubles with Kevin.
She wasn't happy in the marriage.
To the unbelievable lengths she would go to in order to get out. According to Mindy, it all started in 1998 when the 2 girlfriends went to see a movie together.
They had gone to see the film Practical Magic, which was about a couple of sisters who were practicing witches.
It was really cool to me because I liked the actresses in it.
However, that wasn't the only reason Mindy dragged her new friend to see the movie.
Mindy, at the time, she practiced basically kind of like the white witchcraft called Wicca.
It's portrayed more of the realism with most parts that Wiccanism is more like candle magic and meditation and such.
But while Mindy mostly enjoyed the movie for the Wiccan references, she says that Heather had identified strongly with another aspect of the film's plot.
The 2 witches were very upset because the man the one was with, he was hurting her.
According to Mindy, Heather saw clear parallels between the witch's plight and hers.
Kevin did not treat her as well as he should have.
And inspired by the movie and her new friend's unusual beliefs, Heather had decided to do something about it. Early in the spring of 2000, she'd driven to a New Age shop in a neighboring town.
To purchase whatever she needed to conjure this spell.
The spell she bought was considered a banishment spell.
To drive him out of the house, shield her from his wrath, and cast him out.
And then, one spring night when the moon was just right.
Heather had gone over to Lake Nakamixon, which is a big lake near where we live, and did some black magic.
She actually went through the whole, double, toil and trouble routine.
But despite the incantation, when Heather got home, Kevin was still there.
Evidently, it didn't work.
The spell she bought could never hurt a human at all. It was made for ghosts.
Whatever the reason, after her attempt to get rid of Kevin via supernatural means failed, Heather turned to Mindy for help who says she pointed her friend toward the legal process.
I said, you want to banish him? I'm like, get a separation, a restraining order. That's banishment. But she didn't want to hear it.
Instead, Mindy says that Heather had decided on another option, the same one the movie witch had used to get rid of her abusive boyfriend.
They used belladonna.
And there was nothing magical about it.
Belladonna is poison.
In fact, it's one of history's oldest poisons.
It was used to poison a lot of royal kings and queens.
The trick, however, would be finding it. Because when Heather went back to the New Age shop,
They didn't sell it.
but she did find some at a local health food store.
The belladonna that she had chose was a homeopathic remedy. It was used basically for like a light sleep or calming of the nerves.
It's a over-the-counter, kind of like a vitamin supplement type material.
It was also highly diluted, but that didn't stop Heather.
She, the next day, is crushing 100 pills into very fine powder.
And once she had the powdered poison,
She laid everything out for me, and she said, well, I plan to slip it into food.
She was going to put it in as mashed potatoes, send him to work with that stuff.
She said that it would give him a heart attack. She said it's not traceable in his system. No one will know that I ever gave it to him.
Mindy said she was appalled by her friend's plan.
If you're a Wiccan, you don't believe in hurting anybody. That's one of our rules.
And Mindy claims that she continued to try to talk Heather out of her plan.
I said, Heather, divorce works. Do that. Let's not do this.
But apparently Heather wouldn't listen.
She said she can't get out of the marriage with a divorce because she can't afford an attorney.
Her intent was to kill her husband. Bottom line.
And that left Mindy in a dilemma.
I don't know what to do. I can't let her go through with anything like this.
But at the same time,
I didn't think I could just walk into a police station and go, hey, my best friend's going to try to murder her husband.
coming up, will events force Mindy's hand?
I said, we need to call the police.
Or will she be too late?
At his desk.
Diane Zelinsky was at home on the evening of April 2nd, 2000, when someone rang the doorbell of her Richland Town, Pennsylvania townhouse.
My son answered, and he came in and said that Heather wanted to talk to me.
Heather Miller and her husband Kevin lived across the street from Diane, but the two women weren't especially close.
I was just a neighbor across the street who would wave and say hello.
Which partly explained Diane's surprise at what Heather wanted to talk to her about, but only partly.
She said, I'm going to kill Kevin.
Heather's announcement left Diane momentarily speechless.
Shock, I think, is the only way to describe it. I was second-guessing myself on believing what I heard.
However, Heather didn't stop at saying she was going to kill Kevin. Standing on Diane's front porch, the 26-year-old mother of four laid out the entire plan.
She held up a vial, and I read it, and it said belladonna.
Heather was going to plan on killing her husband by using poison.
She told me, I've researched it. He'll drop dead from a heart attack.
She was going to grind it up, put it in the mashed potatoes of some leftovers.
Send it to work with him for dinner.
And then, after her husband dropped dead during the graveyard shift from a supposed heart attack,
She would try to call him at around 2 o'clock in the morning and not get an answer, go to the job, find him dead, act all distraught, and carry on and everything else. And that would be the end of it.
She had her details in order.
She obviously put a lot of time into figuring out what she was going to do.
and she appeared almost anxious to carry out her plan.
She was almost giddy, excited, hopeful.
But there was one catch. Heather needed a favor.
She asked me to hold this vial of belladonna for her.
According to Diane, Heather was afraid Kevin might find the poison. And when Heather thrust it into her hands, Diane claims she was too stunned to say no.
She told me to hold on to it for a couple days till she would come and get it to make the dinner.
And then Diane says that Heather had turned around and walked off, leaving her clutching the poison and wondering what had just happened.
Why she would just knock on somebody's door and hand you a vial and say, "Here, I'm going to kill my husband." It did not make any sense to me at all.
However, as crazy as it all seemed, one thing was painfully clear.
Somebody told me they're going to kill somebody. Now that they told me I'm involved.
Holding the poison, I'm sure it became very real for her, that this was actually going to happen. This man might die.
And if that did happen, Diane could end up going to jail.
Someone will find out about this plan and that I knew about it.
So as soon as Heather left, Diane went inside the house and picked up the phone. But the number she dialed wasn't 911.
I called Mindy.
31-year-old Mindy Robbins was another of Diane's neighbors and Heather's closest friend in the tight-knit townhouse community.
They spent a lot of time together because they were both home during the day.
Diane called me up immediately, and she's like, "What is going on?"
And when she told Mindy what Heather had just told her, Diane was in for another shock.
Mindy knew what I was talking about.
Over the phone, Mindy explained how she'd spent the past few weeks trying to talk Heather out of the murder plot.
I'm like, I don't know what to do. She's not listening.
For Diane, the next step was obvious.
And I said, "We need to call the police."
Before it was too late.
He could die.
Still, Mindy hesitated.
She didn't want the police called. I don't know if that was due to her friendship with Heather. I don't know. She did not want the police called. And she said, maybe we could put a note on Kevin's car.
Mindy says she stalled because she was afraid to get her friend into serious trouble.
I don't know how far she is going to go.
But Diane persisted.
She goes, "Well, look," she goes, "I have family who are in law enforcement. I can help you."
And according to Mindy, that's when she told Diane to go ahead and make the call.
I said, "Something has to be done. She has to be stopped."
Diane made the call. And on April 3rd, Mindy walked into the local barracks of the Pennsylvania State Police, prepared to betray Heather.
I was her best friend, and I was turning her in.
The decision wasn't an easy one, according to Mindy.
My goal in all of this was to save her from doing something that I know she would have regretted for the rest of her life.
So that afternoon, Mindy sat down with the state police investigators and told them what she knew about Heather's plan.
They feared that she would go through with the whole plot that she was planning and that they would become accessories to murder.
Mindy's story definitely grabbed the investigators' attention.
It perks your interest right away when you hear someone talking about trying to do a homicide, and usually we get to them after it already happens.
But one question remained. Just how serious was Heather about going through with it?
Just mouthing off or venting, for lack of a better word. I just want to kill him. I want to wring his neck, whatever those words might be. And we've all experienced that.
And before they could make an arrest, they needed two things: evidence that Heather was serious and Mindy's cooperation.
To make a phone call and try to get her to talk a little bit about this plan so we could capture, in her own words, her laying out the plan.
Mindy agreed to help. And on the afternoon of April 5th, with the investigators listening in, she made the call.
I knew it was for the greater good. It had to be done.
Once on the phone, Mindy tried to get Heather to confirm that she was plotting to kill her husband.
So I'm assuming that everything's still on?
And based on what Heather said, the investigators would need to move fast.
I'm making mashed potatoes tonight.
But while it was clear that the police needed to intervene, when it came to getting enough incriminating evidence for an arrest, Mindy came up short.
Heather did not want to talk to her on the phone.
So if you can, come down.
Okay.
And we'll chat, okay?
All right, cool.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now we're scrambling. What are we going to do?
At that point, there was only one thing they could do.
The police were able to engage Mindy to wear a body wire.
It was kind of like the movies.
We quickly attached a wireless recorder and microphone to Mindy and sent her down the street to Heather Miller's house.
And once she arrived, Heather basically picked up the conversation where she and Mindy had left off.
I'm making it tonight to send to work with him because I want him to eat on dinner tomorrow night.
I sat down at her kitchen table, and I really didn't have to ask her anything.
Although Mindy did ask a few questions to clear up any doubt they were talking about the poison.
Do you not think he's going to taste it?
No. Not with the way Mr. Kevin likes his mashed potatoes.
She wasn't upset about the plan or concerned about what she was doing.
She even told Mindy what she planned to do after finding Kevin's lifeless body.
I'm going to call the cops. Tell them that I went out looking for my husband and found his car at the office. The door was unlocked and I found him dead at his desk.
I pretty much got the whole plan from A to Z.
And she sounded determined to see it through to the end.
You gotta try it again. If it don't work.
Yeah.
And Heather made a lot of incriminatory statements.
Even more incredible was just who was in the room when Heather made those statements.
Okay.
This woman would plan the murder of her husband while serving lunch to her kids.
She's talking about killing their father.
Will you please go sit down so Aunt Mindy and I can talk?
By the time Heather and Mindy had finished talking, the investigators had heard more than enough.
We can go forward and make an actual arrest.
And a few hours later, when Heather was hurrying home after running some errands,
We pulled her over right outside the housing development, and I advised her she was under arrest for attempted homicide.
attempted homicide. The police had managed to stop the plot just hours from its completion.
It was in final stages at this point in time.
In fact, just minutes before her arrest.
My cell phone rang, and it was Heather. And she said, I'm going to be stopping by tonight to pick up the vial of belladonna.
And all the while, her husband Kevin had no idea that Heather was plotting to kill him.
I get a phone call while I'm at the part-time job, telling me that they have her in custody. And they didn't tell me for what. They just simply said, we need you to come home.
Coming up, Heather's trial starts with a twist.
It had everyone talking.
And ends with yet another shocking revelation.
I was blown away.
On September 14th, 2000, the Bucks County District Court in tiny Quakerstown, Pennsylvania, was the middle of a mob scene.
National media, NBC, CBS, trucks parked outside the Bucks County Courthouse was unusual.
There was, TV cameras all from Philly and Allentown.
Of course, it wasn't just any trial that was getting started that morning. 26-year-old Heather Miller was charged with attempted murder after allegedly plotting to poison her husband.
This isn't something typical that happens in our quiet little town. It's very low crime.
Although that alone wasn't enough to account for all the cameras.
There was this bizarre black magic plot going on.
It had everyone talking.
And they would be talking even more once Heather arrived for court that morning.
The elevator opened up, and out walks Heather Miller and Kevin Miller hand in hand.
Despite the fact that she had been charged with plotting his murder, Kevin had decided to stand by his wife of 5 years.
He did acknowledge that he had not been the best husband.
I'm not an innocent party in it as far as, being the type of person that would yell and scream. All marriages go through difficulties. Ours just went to an extreme with it.
For the sake of the family, clearly Kevin made a decision that he wanted to stay with her and was, going to support her.
And now he was determined to make things right, even as he escorted his accused wife to the defense table.
I had my backbone still. Kevin was still standing there beside me.
I was going to do what I could for her.
She would need all the help she could get, considering the long list of charges against her.
Attempted murder, aggravated assault, simple assault, recklessly endangering another person, and solicitation to commit murder.
And if convicted, the penalty could be just as serious.
The maximum potential sentence could be as much as 80 years.
But considering that no one had actually died, did she deserve such a harsh punishment? According to the prosecution's opening statement, the answer was undoubtedly yes.
It wasn't just a matter of her venting to her neighbors about the fact that she wanted to kill her husband. It was a matter of her taking actual steps.
This was not an overnight plan. This took some time. She researched poison. She bought poison.
Her intent was to kill her husband. I'm positive on that.
And they even had her on tape saying just that.
They're going to do an autopsy. I know they will. I know they will. Did you ask questions at the health food store if it could be traced? Because I told them that I'm starting a new job and I need to know if it'll pop positive on the drug test.
And you were telling them you were taking it for sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Most damning piece of evidence presented at trial, I believe, was the audio recordings we made.
The friend who'd betrayed Heather and helped the police make those recordings, 31-year-old Mindy Robbins, also took the stand for the prosecution, albeit reluctantly.
I tried to get out of it. I was so nervous. I was so conflicted. I knew I was going to have to see her. I knew I was going to have to say things that she didn't want anybody else to hear.
Starting with the details of the murder plot.
I was crying through a good portion of my testimony because my best friend is sitting there and she doesn't understand. Even if you don't act on it, sometimes saying something is bad enough.
But things would get even more upsetting for Mindy when Heather's defense attorney started his cross-examination.
He was putting as much blame on Mindy as he did on Heather. He felt that the two of them together came up with this whole thing, and that he felt that Mindy was just as much fault and should have been in just as much trouble.
And why would Mindy urge Heather to murder her husband? According to the defense, it all came down to jealousy.
Her and Heather were lovers.
On the stand, Mindy didn't deny it.
Mindy testified that she had a sexual relationship with Heather Miller.
I had female relationships before.
And according to Mindy, as the two women had become close,
we just ended up getting together one night.
Their relationship became intimate.
What's more, according to Mindy, things hadn't stopped there.
I was in a bad girl phase, and we invited other people into the situation.
Younger guys in the neighborhood.
An illicit affair, swinging threesomes with younger men, and witchcraft. The story was getting juicier by the minute.
I was blown away. All these dirty, ugly secrets coming out.
And it was about to get even uglier for Heather, because according to the prosecution, her affair with Mindy and others provided her with a powerful motive for murder.
Heather wished to kind of get out of the married role and just start enjoying a single lifestyle.
When I came along and kind of introduced her into that, bad girl world, she kind of jumped at it.
So why not get a divorce? According to the prosecutor, Heather had her reasons to want Kevin dead. Hundreds of thousands of reasons.
There was a substantial amount of insurance money to be had.
Close to $750,000.
Between Heather's history of affairs and what they claimed was a $750,000 motive, the prosecution wrapped up its case all but sure of a conviction.
we were pretty confident that we had a pretty solid case against Heather.
The evidence was there. The wiretaps, the statements from her friends and neighbors.
So when it was the defense's turn, they did the only thing they could. On September 18th, Heather took the stand in her own defense, looking nothing like a murderer or a witch, for that matter.
She was wearing this adorable pink suit. Her hair was back in a French braid with a big bow on the end of it. She was just the most demure, helpless little thing.
On the stand, she admitted that things were not good between her and Kevin in April of 2000.
Our marriage was so snowballed that I don't think either one of us knew which end was up.
And the alleged poisoning plot. According to Heather, it had started out the same as her so-called attempt at black magic, as a harmless bit of make-believe.
She said it was a lot of talk. She was making this plan with her girlfriends, kind of having fun, kind of having this little fantasy. She was not planning on going through with this.
It never got that far.
In fact, Heather claimed it had only gone as far as it did because Mindy had been egging her on, not urging her to get a lawyer as she had claimed.
Heather Miller had no hesitancy to portray Mindy as up to no good herself.
She was blaming me for coming up with the plan. She was blaming me for wanting him out of the picture.
But as the plan progressed, Heather said she had started having second thoughts.
Kevin had been verbally and emotionally abusive to her for years, but he was a good father.
So at the last minute,
she backed out of it. She wasn't going to take the children's father away from them.
Which, according to Heather, was why she had knocked on her neighbor Diane's front door.
It was a cry for help.
I think she subconsciously wanted to be stopped because there's no other reason why she would just knock on somebody's door and hand you a vial and say, here, I'm going to kill my husband with this in a couple days.
But could she have killed him, even if she had tried? According to the defense, there was no way Heather could be guilty of attempted murder, even if she had slipped the poison into Kevin's food.
It would not kill you.
The kind that she had purchased couldn't hurt anybody.
Not the 100 pills she'd allegedly ground up, or even 1,000.
You would have to eat pounds upon pounds of the material to even affect you in some way.
The worst it might do would have been to give Kevin some indigestion.
Even the prosecution admitted it.
That the amount of belladonna that she bought was not going to be a lethal dose.
However, in their closing argument, the prosecution said that it was Heather's intent that mattered, not the inept nature of her plan.
So the question is, did she take substantial steps in order to facilitate the murder of her husband?
But in its close, the defense asked, where was the crime if the victim was never in danger? A victim who, as Heather's attorney pointed out in closing, had already forgiven her.
He said, look at this couple. Kevin believes his wife. She loves him. Look at them. You should find her not guilty.
Coming up, Heather and her husband react to the verdict.
I remember they looked at each other, but no words were exchanged.
And she struggles to move on.
I've dealt with the stares and the whispers and the, oh, I know who you are.
On September 19, 2000, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict in the trial of Heather Miller. The 26-year-old mother of four was accused of attempted murder for plotting to poison her husband, Kevin.
The defense case was that, yes, she did come up with this plot, but she was not planning on going through with this.
But that didn't matter, according to the prosecution.
The line was crossed when the talk was no longer just talk, but actual actions of going out and buying the belladonna.
But was that still true, even though the supposed poison wouldn't actually have killed him?
What could make her think that something she would buy at a health food store would be lethal?
Which mattered more, ability or intent? It was all up to the jury.
The jury said guilty.
Heather and her husband, who had stood beside her throughout the trial, appeared stunned by the verdict.
I remember they looked at each other. but no words were exchanged.
It was a very touching, very kind of sad scene.
But was even worse coming. Although Heather was eligible for as much as 80 years in prison, her attorney asked the judge for leniency.
He asked for a sentence of less than 2 years.
But in the end, the judge sentenced Heather to more than twice that, 4.5 to 10 years in prison.
The sentence was a kick in the face.
And not just for her.
I wasn't the only one doing that 5 years. My kids did it. Kevin did it.
Still, Kevin continued to stand by Heather's side.
Every 6 to 8 weeks, I would make the trek out there with the kids to, spend time with their mother.
He did more for me while I was in jail than anybody could have ever expected.
I was just looking to try and keep the family together.
Although in the end, his efforts failed. The couple divorced in 2007.
Other than the fact that it provided a sense of normalcy for the kids, everything that I had done was for nothing.
Heather says her biggest regret is what her family endured.
I will always deal with my guilt. And it's not guilt because of what I did, it's guilt because of what I did to my family.
Since her release, Heather has returned to Bucks County and tried to rebuild her life.
I've dealt with the stares and the whispers and the, "Oh, I know who you are."
But she says she's paid her debt.
I've done my time for what I've done. Everybody deserves that second chance.
Although Heather apparently makes one exception. In all the years since her arrest, she's never spoken to the friend and lover who ultimately betrayed her.
I can't.
I hope she's well, and I hope that she has moved on in a positive life and done something awesome with herself. But I do wish her well.
On the morning of February 2nd, 2008, nothing about Tinley Park, Illinois, suggested that history was about to remember it for tragedy. Located just outside Chicago, the suburban community was the kind of place where weekends unfolded at a slower pace than the city only a short drive away. Families ran errands, shoppers visited local businesses, and retail employees prepared for another ordinary Saturday. Brookside Marketplace, with its familiar collection of stores and restaurants, welcomed visitors as it had countless times before. Among those businesses stood a Lane Bryant clothing store, where employees unlocked the doors, arranged merchandise, and prepared to greet customers. It should have been an unremarkable day. Instead, within less than an hour, the store would become the scene of one of Illinois' most haunting unsolved mass murders. 5 women would lose their lives. One would survive by making an unimaginable decision. And nearly 2 decades later, the identity of the man responsible would remain unknown. Cases like this often leave investigators with little to begin their search. Sometimes there are no witnesses. Sometimes there is almost no physical evidence. Sometimes the crime occurs under the cover of darkness, giving the offender every possible advantage. But the Lane Bryant murders were different. The attack happened in broad daylight. There was a surviving eyewitness. Investigators recovered DNA, fingerprints, cartridge casings, and a recording from a 911 call. The suspect's voice was captured, if only briefly. His physical appearance was described in unusual detail. Even years later, advances in forensic science would allow investigators to continue examining evidence collected from that morning. Yet despite all of those advantages, the case remains unsolved. It is this contradiction that has continued to fascinate investigators and the public alike. How could a man walk into a busy shopping center on a Saturday morning, commit such an extraordinary act of violence, and simply disappear? The answer has remained beyond reach since the day the crime occurred. But before examining the investigation, before considering theories or unanswered questions, It is important to remember where every true crime story should begin, not with the offender, but with the people whose lives were forever changed. On February 2nd, 5 women entered a clothing store for reasons as ordinary as any other Saturday. Some had come to work. Others had come to shop. None of them knew they were about to become victims of one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in modern American history. Their stories deserve to be remembered before the mystery surrounding the unknown gunman. At approximately 10 o'clock that Saturday morning, the Lane Bryant store opened for business. Employees prepared the sales floor while customers began arriving. There was no indication that anything unusual was about to happen. Nothing appeared out of place. No alarm sounded. No suspicious activity had been reported. The routine of retail work unfolded exactly as expected. Store manager Rhoda McFarland, 42 years old, was present to help open the store. As manager, she carried the responsibilities that accompany the beginning of every business day, ensuring the store was ready, assisting employees, and welcoming customers. Like everyone else inside that morning, she had every reason to believe it would be another ordinary shift. Alongside her were other women whose paths had crossed inside the store through work or shopping. Connie Woolfolk, 37 years old. Jennifer Bishop, 34. Carrie Chusso, 33. Sarah Safransky, just 22 years old. Their names would later become permanently connected by a crime they could never have anticipated. Another woman, a part-time employee whose identity has never been publicly released, was also inside the store. Her privacy has been carefully protected throughout the investigation, and for understandable reasons. She would become the only surviving eyewitness to the murders. Her account would prove invaluable to investigators attempting to reconstruct those devastating 45 minutes. At that moment, however, she was simply another employee beginning her workday. The women inside the store did not share the same backgrounds, nor were they all there for the same purpose. Some had come to earn a living. Some had simply planned to shop. Their ordinary Saturday routines had briefly intersected inside a single retail store, creating a tragic coincidence that none of them could possibly have foreseen. In retrospect, it is impossible not to notice how completely ordinary those first moments must have seemed. Customers browsing clothing racks, employees greeting visitors. Conversations about purchases, schedules, or weekend plans may have filled the store, though the details of those interactions have never been publicly documented. The routine atmosphere that exists inside thousands of retail stores every weekend likely existed. There as well. That normalcy would make what followed even more shocking. True crime stories often begin with warning signs, arguments, threats, suspicious behavior, or escalating conflicts. The Lane Bryant murders offered no such obvious prelude. The violence arrived without warning. That sudden transition from routine to catastrophe has become one of the defining characteristics of the case. Even experienced investigators later acknowledged how rapidly events unfolded. The attack itself would last less than an hour, yet the consequences would echo for decades. What makes this case particularly unsettling is not simply the number of victims, but the setting in which the crime occurred. Retail stores are places associated with ordinary life. They are environments built around routine human interaction, familiarity, and predictability. Customers expect safety. Employees expect another shift. Few people ever imagine that such places could suddenly become scenes of unimaginable violence. On that February morning, however, the familiar environment of a neighborhood clothing store became something entirely different. Without warning, ordinary routines will be interrupted by a man who appeared, at first glance, entirely unremarkable. According to investigators, he looked like someone who belonged there. That appearance would become one of the reasons he was able to approach without immediately raising suspicion. In the minutes ahead, the calm atmosphere inside the Lane Bryant store would vanish. The women inside had no way of knowing that the next person to walk through the entrance would forever change the lives of their families. The Tinley Park community, and the investigators who would spend years trying to answer one question that still remains unresolved today. Who committed the Lane Bryant murders? And how did he disappear without leaving behind a name? By the time the Lane Bryant store had been open for only a short while on the morning of February 2nd, 2008, everything still appeared entirely routine. Employees had settled into the rhythm of the day, and customers had begun browsing through the racks of clothing without any reason to feel concerned. Brookside Marketplace continued to operate as it always did on a Saturday morning, with people arriving to shop, run errands, or simply enjoy the weekend. Nothing about the activity outside suggested that, inside one small retail store, a sequence of events was about to unfold that investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct. At some point after the store opened, a man entered the Lane Bryant location. According to the surviving witness, he was a male estimated to be between 25 and 35 years old. He stood approximately 6 feet to 6 feet 2 inches tall and had a large, broad-shouldered build. His complexion was described as medium to dark. One of the most distinctive features of his appearance was his hairstyle. He wore his hair in cornrows, with a single braid hanging along the right side of his face. Attached to the end of that braid were 4 green beads, a detail so unusual that investigators would later emphasize it repeatedly in the hope that someone might recognize him. His clothing also appeared deliberate. He wore a dark jacket and black jeans with decorative stitching or designs on the back pockets. More importantly, he was dressed in a way that resembled a delivery worker. At first glance, there was nothing about him that immediately signaled danger. Retail employees encounter delivery personnel, vendors, and customers throughout every business day. Someone dressed in practical work clothing could easily blend into the normal flow of activity. Rather than immediately revealing his intentions, the man reportedly behaved calmly. He spoke with employees in a normal manner, creating an impression that nothing was wrong. Those few moments of ordinary conversation would later stand in stark contrast to the violence that followed. Investigators believe this initial interaction allowed him to avoid raising suspicion. No one inside had reason to believe they were facing an imminent armed robbery. Then, without warning, the situation changed completely. The man produced a Glock pistol chambered in .40 caliber and announced that he was robbing the store. In an instant, an ordinary Saturday morning became a hostage situation. The women inside the store were confronted with a life-threatening situation that offered almost no opportunity to escape. At the beginning of the robbery, those inside included the store manager, another employee, and 2 customers. The gunman ordered them into a back room of the store, separating them from the sales floor and from anyone outside who might have realized something was wrong. The decision to move the victims into a rear area would later become one of the defining moments of the crime, allowing the attacker to isolate them from view while events continued to unfold beyond the awareness of other shoppers in the marketplace. Tragically, the number of hostages did not remain fixed. As the robbery was already underway, 2 additional customers entered the Lane Bryant store completely unaware that an armed man had taken control inside. Instead of finding a normal shopping environment, they too became captives. The randomness of those moments has remained one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the case. Those customers had made an ordinary decision to enter a clothing store on a Saturday morning, never knowing that a violent crime was already in progress behind closed doors. Once all of the victims had been gathered together, the gunman restrained them. Investigators later determined that he did not use professionally prepared restraints or equipment brought specifically for that purpose. Instead, he relied on materials found inside the store itself. Tape was used along with clothing and merchandise, including undergarments sold by the retailer, to bind a victim's hands and feet. This detail attracted considerable attention during the investigation. Detectives noted that the method appeared improvised rather than carefully planned. Had the offender intended from the beginning to control multiple hostages, they reasoned, he might have arrived carrying rope, zip ties, or other restraints. Instead, he adapted to the environment around him. Although investigators considered this observation significant, they stopped short of drawing definitive conclusions. It remained only one piece of a much larger puzzle. While being held captive, the victims found themselves in circumstances almost impossible to imagine. They had been disarmed, restrained, and forced into a confined space by an armed stranger. Yet even under those conditions, one remarkable act of courage would provide investigators with some of the most valuable evidence in the entire case. Rhoda McFarland, the store manager, managed to secretly place a call to emergency services using her cellular phone equipped with a Bluetooth headset. The call lasted only a short time, but its significance would become enormous. During the recording, investigators later identified what they believed to be the suspect's voice. At one point, he appeared to say the words, "I'm losing it." Those 3 words would become one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation, because the recording captured the voice of the man believed responsible for the murders. It represented an exceptionally rare piece of evidence. Unlike eyewitness descriptions, which can be influenced by stress or memory, the recording preserved an actual moment from inside the store while the crime was unfolding. Investigators released portions of the audio in hopes that someone might recognize the speaker. The phrase itself also generated discussion. Some investigators suggested it might indicate panic or emotional instability during the robbery. Others cautioned against reading too much into a single sentence spoken under unknown circumstances. Without additional context, the meaning of those words could not be determined with certainty. They remain part of the evidence, but not an explanation for what happened next. As the brief 911 call came to an end, the victims remained bound inside the back room. Outside, the shopping center continued its normal Saturday routine, unaware that emergency responders had just received a desperate plea for help. Inside the store, however, the situation was rapidly approaching its most devastating moment. The hostages had complied with every command that had been given to them. They had offered no known armed resistance. They remained restrained and under the control of the gunman. Yet despite that compliance, the violence was not over. Within moments, the robbery would transform into one of the deadliest unsolved mass shootings in Illinois history, leaving investigators to confront not only the challenge of identifying an unknown killer, but also the painful question of why a robbery that appeared to be under complete control ended in the execution of 5 innocent women. As the victims remained restrained inside the back room of the Lane Bryant store, the robbery crossed a line from which there would be no return. Up to that point, the events, while terrifying, still resembled the pattern seen in many armed robberies. An armed offender had entered a business, taken control of those inside, and forced them into a confined area. Such situations are frightening and unpredictable, but they do not always end in loss of life. In Tinley Park that Saturday morning, however, the next moments would transform an already serious crime into one of the most devastating unsolved mass murders in Illinois history. According to the investigation, the gunman opened fire on the hostages at close range. 5 women were killed inside the back room. The victims were Rhoda McFarland, the 42-year-old store manager whose courage had led her to secretly place the brief 911 call. Connie Woolfolk, 37 years old, Jennifer Bishop, 34, Carrie Chuso, 33, and Sarah Safransky, only 22 years old. Each had entered the store for reasons that could not have been more ordinary. Some had come to work another weekend shift. Others had simply intended to shop. None of them could have imagined that their lives would end inside a neighborhood clothing store. During the middle of a Saturday morning, Investigators also confirmed that at least one of the victims had been sexually assaulted during the course of the crime. The confirmation added another deeply disturbing dimension to an already horrific case. While authorities acknowledged this fact publicly, they released only limited information, choosing to protect the dignity and privacy of the victims and their families. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement consistently avoided unnecessary detail, focusing instead on evidence that might help identify the offender. Their approach reflected an important principle in cases involving extreme violence. The victims should never be remembered solely for the crimes committed against them. Amid the devastation, one person survived. The part-time employee, whose identity has never been publicly disclosed, was shot in the neck during the attack. Although seriously wounded, she remained alive. In those terrifying seconds, she made a decision that almost certainly saved her life. Rather than moving or calling out after the gunfire stopped, she remained completely motionless, pretending to be dead. It is impossible to fully understand the fear she must have experienced in that moment. Wounded, surrounded by victims who no longer responded, and unable to know whether the gunman might return, she stayed still until she believed it was safe. Her survival was not the result of rescue arriving before the attack concluded. It came through extraordinary composure under circumstances that few people could ever imagine facing. Later, her testimony would become one of the most valuable sources of information available to investigators. Because she had seen the suspect before the violence unfolded, she was able to provide a detailed physical description that would shape the investigation for years to come. Her account helped establish the estimated age, height, build, hairstyle, clothing, and other distinctive characteristics of the unknown man. Without her testimony, investigators would have possessed far less information about the individual they were searching for. By the time police officers responded to the emergency call, the attack had already ended. Officers arrived within minutes of the 911 call placed by Rhoda McFarland. Their response was rapid, reflecting the seriousness of an active armed robbery involving hostages. Yet when they entered the Lane Bryant store, they found a scene of unimaginable devastation. 5 women had been killed. 1 survivor remained critically injured. The gunman was gone. There had been no exchange of gunfire with responding officers, no dramatic confrontation at the scene, and no immediate pursuit through the shopping center. Somehow, during the brief window between the shootings and the arrival of law enforcement, the offender had escaped. Even today, one of the most troubling aspects of the case is that no one has been confirmed to have seen him leave the shopping center. The crime had unfolded during daylight hours in a commercial area where people continued arriving and departing throughout the morning. Nevertheless, investigators were unable to identify any witness who definitively observed the suspect fleeing after the murders. This absence of reliable sightings has remained one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the case. Because of that unexplained disappearance, investigators considered several possibilities while remaining careful not to present speculation as fact. One possibility was that the offender had planned his escape route in advance, allowing him to leave quickly before police established a perimeter. Another was that a vehicle had been waiting nearby, enabling him to depart almost immediately after leaving the store. Authorities acknowledged that such scenarios could explain how he vanished so quickly, but they emphasized that neither theory had been proven. No confirmed evidence established exactly how he escaped or whether anyone assisted him. As detectives began documenting the crime scene, they recognized that they were facing an investigation of enormous complexity. The violence had occurred inside a relatively confined commercial space. Multiple victims, physical evidence, and witness testimony would all need to be carefully examined. Every object left behind had the potential to reveal something about the unknown offender. Every minute of the timeline would have to be reconstructed with precision. Although the attack itself had lasted less than an hour, Understanding exactly what happened during those 45 minutes would require years of investigative work. Among the first priorities was preserving the scene. Detectives collected evidence that could later be subjected to forensic examination, that documented the locations of the victims, examined the areas where the hostages had been restrained, and recovered physical evidence left behind during the robbery and shootings. At the same time, investigators interviewed the surviving employee, knowing that memories are often clearest immediately after an event, even under traumatic circumstances. Her observations would later be compared with every other piece of available evidence in an effort to create the most accurate reconstruction possible. Outside the Lane Bryant store, the community struggled to understand what had happened. News spread rapidly that 5 women had been killed inside a local business. Families waited anxiously for official confirmation. Friends searched for information that could explain how an ordinary Saturday morning had ended in unimaginable loss. As the identities of the victims became known, grief spread far beyond Tinley Park. What had begun as an armed robbery had evolved into a crime that would capture national attention, not only because of its brutality, but because of the mystery surrounding the offender. Investigators now faced 2 equally important responsibilities. The first was to determine exactly how the crime had unfolded, using every available piece of evidence to reconstruct the events inside the store. The second, and ultimately the more difficult task, was identifying the man who had entered the Lane Bryant store looking like an ordinary visitor and left behind one of the most enduring unsolved murder cases in modern Illinois history. The answers, they believed, were hidden somewhere within the evidence collected that morning. Whether those answers would ever lead to an arrest remained an entirely different question. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, the Lane Bryant store was transformed from a familiar retail space into one of the most carefully examined crime scenes in Illinois. Every area of the building, particularly the back room where the victims had been held, became the focus of an extensive forensic investigation. Detectives understood from the very beginning that the person responsible had disappeared within minutes, leaving them with only the evidence collected at the scene and the testimony of the lone survivor. Every decision made during those first hours would influence the direction of an investigation that, years later, would still remain active. Crime scene specialists began preserving and documenting every piece of physical evidence they could locate. Investigators recovered DNA evidence, fingerprints, cartridge casings from the .40 caliber Glock handgun used during the attack, and numerous items connected to the restraint of the victims. Tape and store merchandise that had been used to bind the hostages were carefully collected and examined, because the offender had relied on materials found inside the store rather than bringing specialized restraints. Detectives hoped that the objects he had touched might preserve fingerprints, biological evidence, or other forensic clues capable of identifying him. The investigation would ultimately involve repeated examinations of this evidence as forensic. Technology continued to advance over the years. One of the most significant sources of information came from the surviving employee. Although she had endured unimaginable trauma, her account provided investigators with a remarkably detailed description of the man responsible. She estimated that he was between 25 and 35 years old at the time of the murders. He stood approximately 6 feet to 6 feet 2 inches tall and possessed a large, broad-shouldered build. His skin tone was described as medium to dark. Most importantly, she remembered distinctive characteristics that were unlikely to be overlooked by someone who knew him personally. His hair was styled in cornrows, with a single braid hanging down the right side of his face. Attached to that braid were 4 green beads. Investigators repeatedly emphasized this feature because it was unusually specific. Hairstyles change, clothing can be discarded, and physical appearance can evolve over time. But an individual known for wearing such a distinctive braid might be recognized by friends, relatives, co-workers, or acquaintances. The witness also described his clothing. He wore a dark jacket and black jeans featuring decorative stitching or designs on the back pockets. Earlier in the encounter, his overall appearance had resembled that of a delivery worker. A detail investigators believed explained why his arrival had not immediately alarmed employees. By combining these observations with the evidence recovered from the scene, detectives hoped someone would eventually recognize the description and come forward with crucial information. Another extraordinary piece of evidence was the brief recording captured during Rhoda McFarland's secret 911 call. Although the conversation itself lasted only a short time, investigators identified what they believed to be the suspect's voice saying, "I'm losing it." Those words became one of the few direct connections between the unknown offender and the outside world. Law enforcement later released portions of the recording in hopes that someone familiar with the speaker would recognize his voice or speech pattern. Investigators understood that voices can sometimes trigger recognition in ways that photographs cannot. A family member, former co-worker, neighbor, or friend might identify subtle characteristics invisible in a written description. The recording, therefore, became one of the investigation's most valuable public resources. At the same time, detectives exercised caution in interpreting the statement itself. While some observers viewed the phrase as evidence that the offender had become emotionally overwhelmed during the robbery, investigators emphasized that its meaning could not be determined with certainty. Without knowing the context in which it was spoken, the words alone could not establish motive, emotional state, or intent. Responsible investigators avoided presenting speculation as fact, focusing instead on evidence that could be independently verified. As forensic examinations continued, detectives also analyzed the physical evidence for biological traces. DNA recovered from the scene became an especially important component of the investigation. Over the years, advances in forensic science allowed previously collected samples to be re-examined using more sophisticated techniques than those available in 2008. Among the evidence investigators continued to study was a blood sample believed to belong to the offender that had reportedly been recovered beneath the fingernails of one of the victims after she resisted during the attack. If confirmed, such evidence represented one of the strongest opportunities to identify the perpetrator through future scientific developments. Rather than allowing the case to grow stagnant, authorities periodically revisited the forensic evidence as technology improved, demonstrating their continued commitment to solving the murders. Investigators also considered what the method of restraint might reveal about the offenders. Planning. The fact that he had used tape, clothing, and merchandise from inside the store instead of bringing prepared restraints suggested that at least part of the crime may have involved improvisation. Detectives acknowledged that this observation did not prove the robbery had been poorly planned, nor did it eliminate the possibility that the offender had intended violence from the beginning. It simply represented another behavioral detail requiring careful analysis. Every aspect of the offender's conduct, from his calm entrance into the store to his use of available materials and his rapid escape, form part of a larger behavioral picture investigators attempted to assemble without drawing unsupported conclusions. Public assistance quickly became another essential element of the investigation. Law enforcement released the witness description widely through news organizations and requested information from anyone who believed they recognized the suspect. Years later, in 2018, investigators introduced a new three-dimensional facial reconstruction created using modern facial imaging technology. The updated image reflected continuing efforts to generate fresh leads long after the initial investigation. Detectives hoped that someone who had overlooked earlier sketches or descriptions might respond differently to a more lifelike representation of the suspect's appearance. The release demonstrated that, despite the passage of time, authorities had not abandoned the case. They continued searching for new ways to encourage witnesses to come forward and to keep public attention focused on the investigation. Yet despite possessing what many investigators would consider an unusually strong collection of evidence, DNA, fingerprints, cartridge casings, a surviving eyewitness, a recorded sample of the suspect's voice, and a highly detailed physical description, the identity of the offender remained unknown. This contradiction became one of the defining frustrations of the Lane Bryant investigation. Cases with far less evidence have sometimes been solved quickly, while this investigation, supported by multiple forms of forensic and testimonial evidence, continued without an arrest. As months turned into years, detectives were forced to confront an increasingly difficult reality. Identifying the man responsible would require more than collecting evidence. It would require connecting that evidence to a specific individual. Somewhere, investigators believed, there was a missing piece capable of transforming a collection of clues into a name. Until that connection could be made, the murders at the Lane Bryant store would remain one of America's most troubling unsolved cold cases. A reminder that even extensive forensic evidence cannot always overcome the absence of a single crucial lead. As the years passed following the murders at the Lane Bryant store in Tinley Park, investigators found themselves confronting a reality that has defined many of America's most challenging cold cases. The crime itself had unfolded in less than an hour. Yet the search for the person responsible stretched from months into years, and from years into decades. Despite the collection of significant forensic evidence, detailed eyewitness testimony, and continued public interest, no arrest was made. The investigation remained active. But the central question had not changed since the morning of February 2nd, 2008. Who entered the store, murdered 5 women, wounded a 6th, and vanished without leaving behind an identifiable name? Throughout the investigation, law enforcement carefully examined possible motives while remaining cautious not to present theories as established fact. One explanation consistently received the greatest attention from investigators was that the crime had begun as an armed robbery. This remained the official investigative theory. The offender had entered the store carrying a .40 caliber Glock handgun, announced a robbery, gathered the victims into a back room, and demanded compliance. On its surface, the sequence of events followed the pattern of a robbery. Yet one detail immediately complicated that explanation. The amount of money reportedly taken from the store was relatively small when compared with the extraordinary level of violence that followed. Armed robberies unfortunately occur with some frequency, but they do not ordinarily end with the execution of multiple restrained victims. That disparity led investigators to continue asking whether robbery alone adequately explained the events inside the Lane Bryant store. Another possibility considered during the investigation was that one particular victim may have been the intended target, while the robbery served as a disguise for a more personal motive. Detectives acknowledged that this theory deserved consideration because of the unusual nature of the crime. However, despite examining the available evidence, investigators publicly emphasized that no confirmed evidence established such a connection. There was no official determination that any one of the victims had been specifically selected in advance. As a result, while the possibility remained part of the investigative process, it was never elevated beyond the status of an unproven theory. Responsible investigators recognized the importance of distinguishing between questions worth exploring and conclusions supported by evidence. A third possibility emerged from one of the most widely discussed pieces of evidence in the entire case: the suspect's recorded statement during the brief 911 call. The words believed to have been spoken, "I'm losing it," led some investigators to wonder whether the offender had experienced a loss of emotional control during the robbery. Perhaps, they suggested, the situation had unfolded differently than he originally intended. Perhaps panic, fear, or some other psychological factor contributed to the escalation of violence. Yet once again, investigators exercise caution. A single sentence, recorded without complete context, could not reliably reveal the speaker's state of mind. The words remained an important part of the evidence, but they did not provide a definitive explanation for the murders. In every public statement, authorities avoided claiming certainty where none existed. That restraint reflected one of the fundamental responsibilities of homicide investigations, allowing evidence, rather than speculation, to guide conclusions. While detectives continued evaluating these possibilities, they also pursued practical investigative work. Thousands of tips were reviewed over the years as members of the public responded to media coverage and renewed appeals for information. Every credible lead required examination. Every potential identification of the suspect had to be compared against witness descriptions, forensic evidence, and the known timeline of the crime. Such work is painstaking and often invisible to the public, but it forms the foundation of long-term homicide investigations. Although many tips ultimately failed to identify the offender, investigators continued encouraging members of the public to come forward, believing that even seemingly insignificant information might eventually prove valuable when combined with other evidence. The forensic evidence collected in 2008 remained equally important as technology evolved. Rather than allowing the physical evidence to remain untouched after the initial investigation, authorities periodically returned to it as advances in forensic science created new opportunities for analysis. DNA evidence continued to receive particular attention. Investigators confirmed that modern testing methods were being applied to biological samples recovered during the original investigation, including the blood believed to belong to the offender that had reportedly been found beneath the fingernails of one victim following an apparent struggle. Such evidence represented one of the strongest hopes for eventually identifying the killer through scientific advancement rather than witness testimony alone. The persistence of these forensic efforts demonstrated that, although the case had become a cold case in terms of elapsed time, it had never become an abandoned investigation. Law enforcement also continued to seek public assistance through renewed outreach efforts. One significant development occurred in 2018 when authorities released a new three-dimensional facial reconstruction of a suspect. Unlike earlier composite sketches, the updated image relied on modern facial imaging techniques designed to create a more realistic representation of the witness's description. Investigators hoped that the passage of time, combined with improved technology, might encourage someone who had previously remained silent to recognize the suspect's distinctive features. They understood that memories change, relationships evolve, and people who were once unwilling to contact police may later decide differently. Even many years after the crime, detectives believed that a single conversation or recognition could fundamentally alter the direction of the investigation. Alongside those efforts, officials also continued emphasizing the financial reward available for information leading to the identification and arrest of the offender. Initially established at $100,000, the reward was later increased to $200,000. The increase reflected both the seriousness of the crime and the determination of investigators to generate new leads despite the passage of time. Rewards cannot guarantee cooperation, but they often serve as reminders that investigations remain active and that authorities continue searching for information capable of breaking long-standing silence. One aspect of the Lane Bryant case distinguishes it from many other major homicide investigations. There has never been a criminal trial. No suspect has been arrested. No defendant has appeared before a judge. No jury has heard evidence in a courtroom. As a result, there has been no opportunity for prosecutors to present the forensic evidence publicly. No cross-examination of witnesses, and no verdict determining legal responsibility. The justice system has never progressed beyond the investigative stage because the most essential requirement for prosecution, the identification of the offender, has never been achieved. This absence of judicial resolution has left families, survivors, investigators, and the community in a state of prolonged uncertainty. Unlike cases that conclude with convictions or acquittals, the Lane Bryant murders remain suspended in an unfinished chapter of criminal justice. Today, the investigation continues to be officially classified as an active cold case. Detectives have repeatedly stated that every new lead is evaluated and that advances in forensic technology continue to provide reasons for cautious optimism. The physical evidence has not lost its importance simply because time has passed. If anything, each scientific advancement offers another opportunity to examine the material with greater precision than was possible in 2008. Yet until the unknown man described by the surviving witness is connected to that evidence, the murders of Rhoda McFarland, Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chusseau, and Sarah Safransky remain unresolved. Their families continue to live with questions that have endured for nearly 2 decades, while one survivor continues carrying memories of a morning that forever changed countless lives. The investigation remains open because investigators believe the answer still exists. Somewhere, they continue to search for the final piece that will transform years of evidence into the identity of the man who has, for so long, remained only an unknown face in one of America's most enduring unsolved murder cases. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the morning of February 2, 2008. Yet the Lane Bryant murders continue to occupy a unique place among America's most haunting unsolved criminal investigations. Time has altered many aspects of the case. The shopping center has continued serving the community. Investigators who worked the original crime scene have retired or passed responsibilities to newer generations of detectives. Forensic science has advanced in ways that few could have imagined when the evidence was first collected. Yet one fact has remained unchanged. The person responsible for the deaths of 5 women inside the Lane Bryant store has never been identified, arrested, or brought before a court of law. The absence of a trial means there has been no formal judicial conclusion to this case. In many homicide investigations, a courtroom becomes the place where evidence is presented. Witnesses testify under oath, and jurors determine whether guilt has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. None of those events have occurred in this investigation. There's been no defendant seated before a judge, no prosecution outlining the sequence of events before a jury, and no verdict capable of providing legal closure. Instead, every confirmed fact remains rooted in the investigative record assembled by law enforcement during the years following the attack. This distinction is important because unresolved cases often invite speculation. Over time, rumors, assumptions, and unsupported theories can begin to overshadow verified evidence. Throughout the Lane Bryant investigation, however, authorities have consistently emphasized the importance of relying on established facts rather than conjecture. They have acknowledged possible explanations for the crime while making clear that none of those possibilities should be mistaken for proven conclusions. That disciplined approach reflects the reality of professional homicide investigations, where unanswered questions must remain unanswered until evidence provides a reliable solution. One of the strongest examples of that commitment can be seen in the continued handling of the forensic evidence. Rather than viewing the passage of time as an obstacle, investigators have repeatedly returned to the physical evidence preserved from the crime scene whenever improvements in forensic technology created new opportunities for analysis. DNA evidence has remained particularly significant. Officials have confirmed that biological material collected during the original investigation continues to be examined using modern scientific methods. Among the evidence receiving continued attention is the blood sample believed to belong to the offender that was reportedly recovered beneath the fingernails of one of the victims following an apparent struggle. Such evidence represents more than a scientific artifact. It represents the possibility that future technological developments could succeed where earlier methods could not. Every advancement in forensic science offers investigators another opportunity to compare preserved evidence against new databases, improved analytical techniques, or investigative methods unavailable in 2008. Equally important has been the continuing role of the surviving witness. Her identity has never been publicly disclosed, a decision that has allowed her to maintain a measure of privacy after surviving one of the most traumatic crimes imaginable. Although the public knows very little about her personal life, her contribution to the investigation has been extraordinary. The detailed physical description she provided immediately after the attack remains one of the strongest eyewitness accounts available in any unsolved homicide investigation. Her observations regarding the suspect's approximate age, height, build, hairstyle, clothing, and especially the distinctive braid with 4 green beads, continue to form the foundation of public appeals for information. Without her testimony, investigators would have possessed far fewer details about the unknown offender. Her survival transformed what could have been a case with no eyewitnesses into one supported by direct observation. Public cooperation has remained another essential element of the investigation. Authorities have repeatedly encouraged anyone possessing information about the case to come forward, regardless of how insignificant that information may appear. Criminal investigations often depend upon the accumulation of small details rather than dramatic revelations. A single memory, a familiar voice, an unusual hairstyle remembered after many years, or knowledge of someone's unexplained behavior following the murders could become meaningful when examined alongside existing evidence. Detectives have therefore continued reviewing tips as they arrive, understanding that information overlooked in one era may acquire new significance when combined with later discoveries. The decision to increase the available reward from $100,000 to $200,000 reflects that continuing effort. The reward serves not only as an incentive for cooperation, but also as a public reminder that the investigation remains active. Cold case status does not mean that investigators have stopped working. Instead, it indicates that although immediate investigative opportunities have been exhausted, the case remains open and can be advanced whenever new evidence or credible information emerges. The Lane Bryant murders exemplify this principle. Detectives have repeatedly stated that every new lead receives attention and that developments in forensic science continue to justify renewed examination of the evidence. Looking back at the events of February 2nd, 2008, what stands out most is not the mystery surrounding the unidentified gunman, but the lives interrupted by his actions. Rhoda McFarland demonstrated remarkable courage by secretly placing the brief 911 call that provided investigators with one of the few recordings of the suspect's voice. Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chuso, and Sarah Safransky each entered the store expecting an ordinary Saturday morning. Their families were left to confront an absence that no investigation, regardless of its eventual outcome, can ever truly erase. The unnamed surviving employee has carried memories of those 45 minutes for the rest of her life, while also bearing the responsibility of becoming the investigation's most important eyewitness. Every discussion of the Lane Bryant murders ultimately returns to these individuals rather than the person responsible for the crime. True crime stories often risk focusing so heavily on offenders that victims become secondary figures in their own narratives. This case serves as a reminder that the lasting significance of such investigations lies not in the mystery surrounding the perpetrator, but in the pursuit of justice for those whose lives were taken. The unknown offender has remained anonymous for years, but the names of the 5 women who died continue to define the case in a far more meaningful way. Their families have endured years without answers, anniversaries marked by remembrance rather than resolution, and the knowledge that no one has yet been held legally accountable for what happened inside the Lane Bryant store. The central question that opened this story remains unanswered today. How could someone commit a mass murder in broad daylight inside a busy shopping center, while leaving behind DNA, fingerprints, surviving eyewitness, cartridge casings, and even a recording of his own voice, yet still avoid identification for so many years? Investigators continue searching because they believe that question can still be answered. Somewhere they believe there is information capable of connecting the preserved evidence to a single individual. Whether that breakthrough arrives through advancing forensic science, a long-forgotten memory, or a witness finally choosing to speak, no one can say. Until that day comes, the Lane Bryant murders remain one of Illinois' most enduring unsolved cases, a tragedy remembered not because of the unknown man who disappeared after 45 minutes of violence, but because 5 innocent women never returned home from what should have been an ordinary Saturday morning, and because the pursuit of justice for them continues with the hope that even after all these years, the truth has not been lost. Even after years have passed, the Lane Bryant murders continue to stand as a reminder that some investigations are measured not only by the evidence collected, but also by the determination to keep searching long after public attention begins to fade. In many criminal cases, the passage of time gradually reduces the likelihood of new witnesses, fresh memories, or previously unknown information. Yet experienced investigators understand that time can also work in the opposite direction. Relationships change. Loyalties weaken. Technology improves. Individuals who were once unwilling to speak may eventually decide that remaining silent is no longer possible. For that reason, the investigation into the murders at the Lane Bryant store has never been officially considered finished. It remains an active cold case, supported by the belief that the evidence collected on February 2nd, 2008, still holds the potential to reveal the identity of the unknown offender. One of the defining characteristics of this case has always been the unusual combination of evidence available to investigators. There was a surviving eyewitness who provided a detailed description of the suspect shortly after the attack. There were fingerprints recovered during the investigation. Detectives collected DNA evidence and cartridge casings connected to the .40 caliber Glock used during the shootings. Investigators also preserved the recording of Rhoda McFarland's brief 911 call, capturing what is believed to be the suspect's voice. Few unsolved homicide investigations possess such a broad range of forensic and testimonial evidence. This reality has continued to frustrate investigators because, despite the quantity of available material, none of it has yet produced the single result that matters most: a confirmed identity. The witness description remains one of the strongest investigative tools available. According to the surviving employee, the suspect was a man between approximately 25 and 35 years old at the time of the murders. He stood between 6 feet and 6 feet 2 inches tall and had a large, broad-shouldered build. His complexion was described as medium to dark. His hairstyle was perhaps his most memorable feature. He wore cornrows with a single braid hanging down the right side of his face, ending in 4 green beads. He also wore a dark jacket and black jeans with decorative stitching on the rear pockets. Investigators have repeatedly emphasized these characteristics because they represent details that someone familiar with the offender might recognize immediately. While clothing can be changed and physical appearance may evolve over time, unusual personal habits or distinctive styles often remain memorable to friends, relatives, co-workers, or neighbors. In 2018, investigators sought to strengthen that public recognition by releasing a new three-dimensional facial reconstruction based on modern imaging technology. The purpose was not to replace earlier descriptions, but to provide a more realistic visualization of the individual described by the surviving witness. Law enforcement hoped that advances in facial reconstruction might trigger memories that earlier sketches had failed to inspire. Such efforts demonstrate an important principle in long-term investigations. Even when no new evidence is discovered, presenting existing evidence in a different way can sometimes produce new leads. Every renewed appeal serves as another opportunity for someone to recognize a face, a voice, or a collection of characteristics that had previously gone unnoticed. Alongside witness testimony, forensic science has continued to play a central role in the investigation. Detectives have repeatedly confirmed that DNA evidence collected during the original crime scene examination remains subject to modern analysis as scientific methods improve. Rather than relying exclusively on the capabilities available in 2008, investigators have taken advantage of technological advancements that allow biological samples to be examined with greater sensitivity and precision. Among the evidence receiving continued attention is the blood reportedly recovered beneath the fingernails of one of the victims after she resisted during the attack. If that biological material belongs to the offender, it remains one of the strongest opportunities to establish a direct connection between the crime scene and a specific individual. Every improvement in forensic science therefore renews hope that evidence preserved years earlier may eventually answer questions that once seemed impossible to resolve. The investigation has also remained open because detectives recognize that information does not always emerge immediately after a crime. Human behavior is complex. Someone may have recognized the suspect's distinctive hairstyle or clothing in 2008 but dismissed the thought as insignificant. Another person may have noticed unusual behavior following the murders but lacked the confidence to report it. Others may simply have been unaware that details they possessed could assist investigators. For these reasons, law enforcement has consistently encouraged members of the public to report information regardless of how minor it may seem. Successful investigations often depend upon assembling numerous small observations into a larger picture rather than discovering a single dramatic piece of evidence. The financial reward associated with the case reflects this continuing effort to encourage cooperation. Initially set at $100,000, the reward was later increased to $200,000 for information leading to the identification and arrest of the offender. While financial incentives alone cannot guarantee that witnesses will come forward, they reinforce the message that investigators remain committed to solving the case. More importantly, the reward reminds the public that the passage of time has not diminished the importance of the investigation or the commitment to achieving justice for the victims and their families. Throughout every stage of the case, investigators have maintained an important balance between determination and restraint. They have pursued multiple investigative theories while avoiding unsupported conclusions. They have acknowledged possibilities without presenting speculation as fact. The robbery remains the official investigative theory. But detectives have also recognized that questions remain regarding the extraordinary level of violence used during the crime. They have considered whether a particular victim may have been the intended target while making clear that no evidence has confirmed such a conclusion. They have examined the suspect's recorded statement, "I'm losing it," while refusing to assign it a definitive meaning in the absence of additional context. This disciplined approach reflects the standards of professional criminal investigation, where evidence must always outweigh assumption. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Lane Bryant murders lies not in what investigators know, but in what they continue to seek. They know the approximate timeline of the attack. They know where it occurred. They know who the victims were. They know that one courageous survivor provided a detailed description of the offender. They know that physical evidence was preserved with great care. They know that the suspect escaped before responding officers arrived. Yet they still do not know the most fundamental fact of all, the identity of the man responsible. Until that answer is found, the case remains unfinished. The story of the Lane Bryant murders is therefore not simply the story of a crime committed on a February morning in 2008. It is also the story of an investigation sustained by persistence, scientific progress, and the belief that justice should never be limited by the passage of time. For the families of Rhoda McFarland, Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chusseau, and Sarah Safransky, as well as for the surviving employee whose courage helped preserve crucial evidence, the hope remains unchanged. Somewhere, investigators believe, there is still a missing piece capable of transforming years of careful investigative work into a name, an arrest, and the long-awaited accountability that has remained absent for nearly 2 decades. The Lane Bryant murders remain one of those rare criminal cases in which the passage of time has not diminished either the tragedy of the crime or the determination to solve it. Nearly 2 decades after 5 women were killed inside a clothing store in Tinley Park, Illinois, the investigation continues to stand as both a testament to modern forensic persistence and a reminder of the limits of criminal investigation when one crucial element, a confirmed identity, is missing. Every anniversary of February 2nd serves not only as a marker of time, but also as a renewed reminder that justice has yet to be achieved. For investigators, the case remains open. For the families of the victims, it remains deeply personal. And for the surviving employee, the events of that Saturday morning remain an experience that can never truly be left behind. Looking back over everything known about the investigation, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. The Lane Bryant murders were never defined by a lack of evidence. Detectives recovered DNA, fingerprints, cartridge casings, and a recording of the suspect's voice. They obtained a detailed eyewitness description from the lone survivor, whose observations provided an unusually complete account of the man's appearance. Authorities later enhanced those efforts by releasing a 3-dimensional facial reconstruction designed to generate new leads. Physical evidence has continued to undergo examination as forensic technology advances. Few unsolved homicide investigations possess such a combination of witness testimony, biological evidence, and preserved forensic material. Yet evidence alone cannot identify a suspect unless it can be connected to a specific individual. That missing connection has remained the central obstacle since the earliest days of the investigation. The official investigative position has remained careful and consistent throughout the years. Detectives believe the crime began as an armed robbery. The suspect entered the Lane Bryant store carrying a Glock .40 caliber handgun, interacted calmly with employees before revealing the weapon, gathered those inside into a back room, and restrained them using tape and merchandise from the store itself. Those actions are supported by witness testimony and physical evidence. What remains uncertain is why the robbery escalated into the murder of 5 restrained women. Investigators have openly acknowledged that the amount of money reportedly taken was relatively small compared with the extraordinary violence that followed. That disparity has ensured that the question of motive remains unresolved. Authorities have examined other possibilities while emphasizing that none have been proven. Investigators considered whether one of the victims may have been the intended target, with the robbery serving to conceal a more personal objective. However, despite careful examination, no evidence has publicly confirmed that theory. Detectives also discussed whether the suspect's recorded statement believed to be the words, "I'm losing it," might suggest emotional instability or panic during the commission of the crime. Yet once again, law enforcement resisted the temptation to treat speculation as certainty. Without additional context, those words cannot reveal precisely what the speaker meant or what he was experiencing at that moment. The willingness of investigators to acknowledge uncertainty has been one of the defining strengths of the case. Rather than forcing conclusions unsupported by evidence, they have consistently allowed the known facts to guide the investigation. Another remarkable aspect of the Lane Bryant investigation is the continued value of the surviving witness's testimony. Her identity has remained protected throughout the years, reflecting respect for her privacy and the extraordinary trauma she endured. Nevertheless, her observations continue to shape every public description of the suspect. She remembered not only his approximate height, build, age, complexion, and clothing, but also the highly distinctive hairstyle featuring cornrows, a single braid hanging along the right side of his face, and 4 green beads attached to its end. Those details remain among the most recognizable characteristics associated with the unidentified offender. They also illustrate the importance of careful eyewitness testimony when supported by physical evidence. The investigation has likewise demonstrated how advances in forensic science can extend the life of a homicide case far beyond its earliest stages. Biological evidence recovered in 2008 continues to be examined as technology evolves. Detectives have specifically confirmed ongoing analysis of DNA evidence, including the blood reportedly found beneath one victim's fingernails after she resisted during the attack. Such evidence represents a continuing source of hope because scientific capabilities today are significantly more advanced than those available when the murders first occurred. Cases once considered unsolvable have been resolved through improvements in forensic analysis, and investigators continue to believe that similar advances may eventually provide the breakthrough needed in this case. Public cooperation remains equally important. Throughout the investigation, law enforcement has encouraged individuals to report information regardless of how insignificant it may appear. A remembered conversation, a familiar voice, recognition of a distinctive hairstyle, or knowledge of someone's unexplained behavior after February 2nd, 2008, could become meaningful when considered alongside the existing evidence. The increase of the reward from $100,000 to $200,000 reflects the continued commitment to generating new leads. More importantly, it demonstrates that investigators have never regarded the case as forgotten. Every credible tip continues to receive attention because detectives recognize that the answer may still exist within information that has not yet reached them. The Lane Bryant murders also remind us that the true measure of an investigation is not simply whether it ends in an arrest, but whether the pursuit of justice continues despite disappointment in the passage of time. Every detective who has inherited this case has done so knowing that years of previous work produced no definitive identification. Yet they have continued examining evidence, reviewing information, and applying new technology because the responsibility to seek justice does not expire. The victims deserve no less. Rhoda McFarland's courage in secretly placing the 911 call preserved evidence that investigators still rely upon today. Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chuso, and Sarah Safransky each lost the opportunity to return to their families after what should have been an ordinary Saturday morning. The unnamed survivor carried not only physical injuries, but also the lifelong responsibility of remembering events that few people could endure. Their experiences remain the heart of this story, far more significant than the anonymity of the man responsible for the crime. As this account draws to a close, the central mystery remains exactly as it began. An unidentified man entered a clothing store in Tinley Park during daylight hours, committed one of Illinois' most shocking unsolved mass murders, and disappeared before police arrived. He left behind forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and even a brief recording of his own voice. He also left behind grieving families, an injured survivor, and a community forever changed by less than an hour of violence. Nearly 20 years later, the investigation continues because investigators believe that the truth has not vanished with time. Somewhere, they believe someone knows the identity of the man described by the surviving witness. Somewhere, a forgotten memory, a newly analyzed DNA sample, or an overlooked piece of information may finally provide the connection that has remained missing for so long. Until that day arrives, the Lane Bryant murders endure as one of America's most enduring unsolved cases, not because of the mystery surrounding the unknown offender, but because 5 innocent women were denied the future they should have lived, and because the search for justice in their names continues with the same determination that began on the morning of February 2nd, 2008. For most criminal investigations, there eventually comes a moment when the stories shift from the search for a suspect to the proceedings of a courtroom. Detectives complete their investigation, prosecutors present evidence, witnesses testify under oath, and a judge or jury determines responsibility under the law. The Lane Bryant murders have never reached that point. Nearly 2 decades after the events of February 2nd, 2008, there's been no arrest, no indictment, no criminal trial, and no conviction. The absence of those milestones has become one of the defining characteristics of the case. It remains suspended between certainty and uncertainty. Investigators know a great deal about what happened inside the Lane Bryant store, yet they still cannot answer the most fundamental question required by the justice system. Who committed the crime? This distinction is more significant than it may first appear. Criminal investigations and criminal prosecutions are separate stages of the justice process. Detectives gather evidence, identify suspects, and reconstruct events. Prosecutors can only proceed when the available evidence can be connected to a specific individual and is believed sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in court. In the Lane Bryant case, investigators have assembled an extensive body of evidence over the years, including DNA, fingerprints, cartridge casings, the recording captured during Rhoda McFarland's brief 911 call, and the detailed testimony of the surviving employee, yet without identifying the unknown offender. None of that evidence can be presented before a jury in the way it would be during a criminal trial. As a result, the investigation has remained active while the judicial process has never begun. Throughout the years, the Tinley Park Police Department has consistently emphasized that the case has not been closed. Instead, it has been classified as an active cold case. The term cold case is often misunderstood. It does not mean that investigators have abandoned the investigation or accepted defeat. Rather, it reflects the reality that immediate investigative leads have been exhausted while the case remains open for future developments. Detectives continue to review information, evaluate new tips, and re-examine physical evidence whenever advancements in forensic science create additional opportunities. Every new piece of information is compared against the evidence collected on the day of the murders, ensuring that the investigation remains capable of moving forward whenever a credible lead emerges. One of the strongest reasons investigators continue to express cautious optimism is the preservation of forensic evidence. Unlike eyewitness memories, which naturally change over time, physical evidence can often be re-examined using technologies that did not exist when a crime occurred. DNA analysis, in particular, has undergone remarkable developments since 2008. Authorities have confirmed that biological evidence collected during the original investigation continues to be subjected to modern testing methods. Among the samples receiving ongoing attention is the blood reportedly recovered beneath one victim's fingernails following an apparent struggle with the offender. If scientific advancements eventually allow investigators to establish a definitive identification through that evidence, the case could move rapidly from investigation to prosecution. For that reason, detectives have repeatedly emphasized the importance of preserving every piece of evidence with the expectation that future technology may succeed where earlier methods could not. Public cooperation remains equally important. The reward associated with the investigation illustrates that commitment. Initially established at $100,000, it was later increased to $200,000 for information leading to the identification and arrest of the individual responsible. Rewards are not simply financial incentives. They also communicate an important message to the public. The investigation remains active, and law enforcement continues to seek assistance from anyone who may possess relevant information. Investigators understand that people sometimes remain silent for years because of fear, uncertainty, divided loyalties, or the mistaken belief that what they know is insignificant. Circumstances can change over time. Relationships evolve, communities change, and individuals may eventually feel prepared to share information they once withheld. Detectives therefore continue encouraging witnesses to come forward regardless of how much time has passed. The release of a modern three-dimensional facial reconstruction in 2018 reflected that same philosophy, rather than allowing the case to fade from public attention. Investigators sought to introduce a more lifelike representation of the suspect based upon the surviving witness's description. Advances in facial imaging provided an opportunity to present familiar evidence in a new form, potentially triggering recognition among individuals who had never responded to earlier appeals. The reconstruction was not intended to replace forensic evidence or eyewitness testimony, but to strengthen the public's ability to visualize the man investigators continued to search for. It represented another example of law enforcement adapting investigative strategies while remaining faithful to the confirmed evidence collected during the original investigation. The official investigative theories have likewise remained measured and evidence-based. Authorities continue to identify armed robbery as the principal explanation for how the crime began, while acknowledging that the amount of money reportedly taken appears small when compared with the level of violence inflicted upon the victims. Detectives have also examined the possibility that one particular victim may have been the intended target, but they have repeatedly clarified that no evidence has established such a conclusion. Similarly, the suspect's recorded statement, believed to be the words, "I'm losing it," remains part of the evidentiary record without providing a definitive explanation of motive or intent. This careful distinction between evidence and speculation has preserved the credibility of the investigation throughout the years. Rather than constructing theories unsupported by fact, investigators have consistently allowed uncertainty to remain where certainty does not yet exist. For the families of Rhoda McFarland, Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chusseau, and Sarah Safransky, however, legal terminology offers little comfort. The classification of the case as an active cold case does not diminish the absence left by their loved ones. Every passing year represents another year without answers, another year without accountability, and another year in which the individual responsible has not been required to face the consequences of his actions in a court of law. The unnamed surviving employee likewise continues to live with memories of the attack while knowing that her detailed testimony, although invaluable, has not yet resulted in an arrest. The burden carried by survivors and families often extends far beyond the conclusion of media coverage, becoming a lifelong reality measured not in headlines, but in anniversaries, memories, and unanswered questions. Yet despite the frustration that accompanies such a prolonged investigation, there remains a reason the Lane Bryant murders have never been closed. Detectives continue to believe that the evidence preserved on February 2nd, 2008, still possesses the potential to identify the offender. Scientific advances continue to reshape what is possible in forensic investigation. Public awareness remains an important source of information. The reward continues to encourage new leads. Most importantly, the commitment to justice has not diminished with time. Cases are not solved simply because years pass. They're solved because investigators continue searching long after many others have stopped paying attention. The story of the Lane Bryant murders, therefore, remains unfinished. There is no courtroom verdict to describe, no sentence to recount, and no final chapter marked by legal resolution. Instead, the case ends where it has remained for nearly 2 decades, with 5 victims whose lives deserve to be remembered, 1 survivor whose courage continues to aid investigators, dedicated detectives who refuse to abandon the search for answers, and an unidentified offender whose name has yet to be connected to the evidence left behind inside a quiet clothing store on an ordinary Saturday morning. Until that connection is finally made, the pursuit of justice continues. Some crimes become remembered because of the scale of their violence, others because of the identity of the offender. The Lane Bryant murders are remembered for a different reason. They remain one of those deeply unsettling cases in which an extraordinary amount of evidence exists. Yet the person responsible has never been identified. It is a case that continues to challenge investigators, forensic specialists, and everyone who has followed its progress, not because there are no answers at all, but because the final and most important answer remains missing. Nearly 2 decades after the events of February 2nd, 2008, the unknown man who entered the Lane Bryant store still exists only as a description preserved by the surviving witness. A voice captured during a desperate emergency call, and biological evidence waiting for the scientific breakthrough or investigative lead that may one day reveal his identity. Yet if this story is to leave any lasting impression, it should not be the image of the offender that remains with us. It should be the memory of the people whose lives were forever changed inside that small clothing store. Rhoda McFarland was more than a store manager. During one of the most terrifying moments imaginable, she quietly managed to place a brief 911 call, creating one of the most important pieces of evidence investigators would ever receive. That act required extraordinary presence of mind under unimaginable pressure. Although the call lasted only a short time, it preserved the suspect's voice and confirmed to emergency responders that a life-threatening situation was unfolding inside the store. Her actions reflected courage in circumstances where fear would have been entirely understandable. Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chuso, and Sarah Safransky also deserve to be remembered for who they were rather than solely for the tragedy that claimed their lives. They entered the Lane Bryant store for reasons as ordinary as countless other people across the United States on any Saturday morning. Some came to work, others came to shop. None expected to become victims of one of Illinois' most enduring unsolved crimes. Their names continue to be spoken because investigators, journalists, and their families have refused to allow them to disappear behind the mystery of the offender. The unnamed part-time employee who survived the attack occupies a unique place within the history of the case. Her identity has never been publicly released, allowing her to retain privacy while living with memories few people could fully comprehend. After suffering a gunshot wound to the neck, she remained motionless and pretended to be dead until the offender left the store. That decision saved her life. Later, despite the enormous trauma she had experienced, she provided investigators with a detailed description that continues to guide the search for the suspect. Every composite image, every facial reconstruction, and every public appeal for information has been rooted in the observations she made that morning. Her survival not only preserved one life, but also preserved evidence that otherwise would never have existed. The investigation itself has demonstrated remarkable persistence. Detectives collected DNA, fingerprints, cartridge casings, physical evidence connected to the restraints used on the victims, and the recording of the suspect's voice. They carefully documented every aspect of the crime scene and continued examining the evidence as forensic science evolved. In 2018, they introduced a new three-dimensional facial reconstruction in an effort to generate fresh leads. Authorities also increased the available reward to $200,000, reaffirming that the search for the offender remained active. These efforts illustrate an important truth about professional homicide investigations. Justice is not measured only by immediate success, but also by the willingness to continue searching when success proves difficult to achieve. The Lane Bryant murders also remind us of the importance of disciplined investigation. Throughout the years, law enforcement has consistently distinguished confirmed facts from speculation. Detectives identified armed robbery as the principal investigative theory while acknowledging unresolved questions surrounding the offender's motive. They considered whether one victim might have been specifically targeted, but never presented that possibility as an established fact. They analyzed the recorded statement believed to be, "I'm losing it," without claiming to understand precisely what the speaker meant. This careful commitment to evidence rather than assumption has protected the integrity of the investigation, even as public curiosity has continued to generate theories beyond what the known facts support. That approach serves as an important reminder that responsible investigations are built not upon dramatic narratives, but upon verifiable evidence. Looking back across the entire sequence of events, perhaps the most striking feature of the case is its ordinary beginning. Nothing about the morning of February 2nd, 2008, suggested that it would become part of criminal history. Brookside Marketplace opened for business as usual. Employees prepared for another workday. Customers entered stores expecting a routine shopping trip. The offender himself initially appeared unremarkable, dressed like a delivery worker and speaking calmly enough to avoid immediate suspicion. The transition from normality to unimaginable violence occurred with terrifying speed. It is precisely that contrast that has made the Lane Bryant murders so difficult to forget. They demonstrate how quickly ordinary life can be interrupted by extraordinary violence and how lasting the consequences of a single hour can become. Nearly 20 years later, investigators continue examining evidence because they believe the case remains solvable. Advances in DNA technology have transformed many investigations once thought impossible to resolve. Biological evidence preserved in 2008 continues to be analyzed using methods unavailable when the crime first occurred. Every new scientific development offers another opportunity to identify the unknown offender. At the same time, investigators continue encouraging members of the public to come forward with information. Someone may recognize the distinctive hairstyle described by the surviving witness. Someone may remember hearing a familiar voice resembling the recording captured during the 911 call. Someone may know details about an individual whose behavior changed after the murders. The smallest piece of information, when combined with existing evidence, can sometimes provide the breakthrough that years of investigation have been unable to achieve. Until that moment arrives, the Lane Bryant murders remain one of the most significant unsolved cases in Illinois. They stand as a reminder that justice delayed is not necessarily justice abandoned. Cold cases endure because investigators continue believing that answers remain discoverable, even when those answers have remained hidden for years. The passage of time may alter technology, investigators, and public attention, But it does not diminish the value of truth or the importance of accountability. As this story comes to an end, the mystery itself remains unresolved. But the purpose of remembering it is clear. It is not to glorify the unknown man who committed these crimes or to elevate him into the central figure of the narrative. Instead, it is to remember Rhoda McFarland, Connie Woolfolk, Jennifer Bishop, Carrie Chusseau, and Sarah Safransky, to acknowledge the courage of the unnamed survivor, and to recognize the continuing efforts of investigators who have refused to let this case disappear into history. Somewhere, the final answer may still exist, preserved in a memory, hidden within a piece of forensic evidence, or waiting for the moment when advancing science reveals what could not previously be seen. Until that day arrives, the Lane Bryant murders remain an unfinished chapter in American criminal history, defined not only by the tragedy of what occurred inside a clothing store on a quiet Saturday morning, but also by the enduring determination that one day, justice may finally reach the 5 women whose lives were taken far too soon.